For centuries, France was considered the strongest power on the European continent. But after the 7 Years' War, it lost almost all of its colonies in North America and India. Britain firmly took first place and began turning into a global hegemon. For France, this was a painful blow to its prestige. Paris refused to accept defeat and waited for a chance to strike back. That chance came in 1775, when the 13 British colonies in North America rose up against London. At first, France watched cautiously. It didn't want to enter an open conflict since its finances were badly weakened after the 7 Years' War. But King Louis XVI and his ministers understood. If the colonies gained independence, Britain would be seriously weakened. So Paris began to provide secret aid. The American rebels received weapons, gunpowder, and money through hidden channels. The turning point came after the American victory at Saratoga in 1777. That success convinced France the uprising had a real chance. In 1778, Paris officially entered the war on the side of the United States. France sent a fleet, an army, and massive resources to support the colonists. At sea, the French Navy fought tough battles against the British. The most important success came at the Battle of the Chesapeake in 1781, where the French fleet blocked the British and cut off any chance of evacuation. On land, the French Expeditionary Corps under General Rochambeau fought alongside George Washington's army. The climax came at Yorktown in 1781, where combined American and French forces surrounded General Cornwallis's army. The British surrendered, effectively deciding the outcome of the war. For France, the war brought long-awaited revenge. Britain lost its largest colonies in North America. Even though France didn't regain its lost territories directly, its prestige soared, and London suffered a massive blow. But the joy didn't last. The war drained the French treasury. Huge expenses on the Navy, the Army, and supplying the Allies deepened the financial crisis. And this very crisis would become one of the factors leading France into revolution in 1789. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted. The monarchy was overthrown, the country was swept by radical changes, and all of Europe watched nervously. At first, Britain stayed out, but when the revolution began threatening the established order in Europe and Republican ideas started to spread, London joined the anti-French coalition. In 1793, France and Britain went to open war. For revolutionary France, this was a true challenge. At sea, the French Navy was no match for the British. Already in 1794, at the glorious 1st of June, the British dealt France a crushing defeat, confirming their dominance at sea. This meant France could hardly hope for colonial success. On land, the war played out differently. The French army, energized by revolutionary slogans and mass mobilization, showed remarkable resilience. In 1794, at the Battle of Fleurus, the French defeated the Austrians, strengthening their position in Europe. Britain, lacking a large land army, relied mostly on allies and its navy. The Royal Navy blockaded French ports, struck at colonies, and supported anti-French uprisings, such as in the Vendée. France responded with unorthodox methods. Revolutionary governments declared a war of the peoples against the kings, sent armies to every front, and tried to undermine the British economy through continental allies. Despite naval defeats, France held on and even managed to win a series of victories in Europe, gradually turning into the leading continental power. But Britain's naval supremacy remained unshaken. When France emerged from the chaos of the Revolution, its new leader was General Napoleon Bonaparte. His military genius quickly made him the most prominent figure in Europe. Napoleon understood. For France to reclaim hegemony, its greatest rival, Britain, had to be crushed. But that was easier said than done. First came the Egyptian gamble. In 1798, Napoleon launched an expedition to Egypt. The plan was bold: cut Britain off from its roots to India and undermine its trade. On land, the French won victories, but in August, Admiral Nelson destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. With no fleet, the expedition was stranded, and the grand design collapsed. Then came Europe. Napoleon rose to first consul and then emperor. On the continent, he scored a series of dazzling victories. Austerlitz, 1805, crushing Austria and Russia. Jena and Auerstedt, 1806, defeating Prussia. Friedland, 1807, victory over Russia. These triumphs made France the dominant power on land. Britain stood alone, relying on its navy. The decisive blow at sea was Trafalgar. In 1805, Napoleon planned an invasion of England. The combined French and Spanish fleets were meant to clear the way. But on October 21st, at the Battle of Trafalgar, Admiral Nelson delivered a decisive victory. The Royal Navy established absolute command of the seas. From then on, Napoleon knew a direct invasion of England was impossible. So he turned to economic warfare, the continental system. In 1806, Napoleon declared the continental blockade, ordering all European ports closed to British goods. The goal was to bankrupt London. In practice, the blockade backfired. Britain kept trading through neutral nations and its colonies, while European economies suffered shortages. Spain and Portugal. To force the Iberian Peninsula into compliance, Napoleon invaded Spain and Portugal. Instead of a quick win, he got stuck in the Peninsular War, 1808 to 1814. Spanish guerrillas and British troops under Wellington inflicted heavy losses. It became Napoleon's Spanish ulcer, draining France's strength. Russia. Britain's key ally remained Russia. In 1812, Napoleon launched his grandest campaign, hoping to compel Tsar Alexander I to honor the blockade. Instead, the Grande Armée was destroyed by hunger, frost, and Russian resistance. After that, Britain and its allies went on the offensive. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations, Napoleon suffered a crushing defeat. By 1814, Allied armies marched into Paris. Napoleon was forced to abdicate and sent into exile. But in 1815, he returned for one last gamble. The 100 Days. It all ended at Waterloo, where Wellington's troops and Blucher's Prussians decisively crushed him. After the fall of Napoleon, France lost its leadership in Europe. Britain had firmly secured global dominance on the seas and in the colonies, but France was not ready to settle for the role of second player. Throughout the 19th century, Paris focused on restoring its influence through colonial expansion. As early as 1830, France began the conquest of Algeria, turning it into one of its main colonies. Soon came expansion into Tunisia, Morocco, and West Africa. By the late 19th century, France had become the world's second-largest colonial empire, behind only Britain. In the Far East, French expeditions gradually took control over Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, creating French Indochina. France even tried to intervene in the New World. In the 1860s, Emperor Napoleon III sought to exploit the American Civil War by installing a friendly monarch in Mexico. French troops occupied Mexico City and placed Austrian Archduke Maximilian on the throne. But once the U.S. war ended, Washington demanded France's withdrawal. Guerrilla resistance erupted in Mexico. French forces had to retreat, and Maximilian was executed. The attempt to make Mexico a base of French influence collapsed completely. On the European continent, France remained a great power, but its main rivals were no longer Britain, but the rising German states. In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War began. France expected a quick victory, but things went very differently. The Prussian army, with superior organization and modern technology, crushed the French at the Battle of Sedan. Napoleon III was captured, and Paris, after a siege, capitulated in 1871. This disaster marked the end of the Second Empire and the birth of the Third Republic. France lost Alsace and Lorraine, while a new force appeared on the map, the German Empire. By the late 19th century, France had indeed restored its status as a global power, thanks to its vast colonies in Africa and Asia. But in Europe, leadership had shifted to Prussia and Britain. Only an alliance with Britain in the early 20th century allowed France to once again play a decisive role in world politics. At the end of the 19th century, France was actively expanding in Africa, where its interests often clashed with Britain's. Crises such as the Fashoda incident in 1898 nearly brought the two nations to war. But in the end, both sides chose compromise. Out of this came the Entente Cordiale of 1904, an alliance that turned former bitter rivals into partners. When World War I broke out in 1914, France and Britain stood shoulder to shoulder against their common enemy, Germany. This marked the end of centuries of rivalry and the beginning of a new era of cooperation.